Hi everyone. I hope you can all hear me and see me. Welcome to this webinar all about how you can optimize your product pages to maximize conversion. Just before we start, you're all on mute, so I won't be able to hear you. And also a bit about me. So my name is Emily Rodgers. I'm a copywriter for Built Visible. I've been a copywriter for about 4 years now. And I've written for brands like ASOS and Trivago and Disney, and I write all kinds of copy. But my specialism lies within product page copy. So I've helped clients increase their conversion using the tips that I'm going to be sharing in this webinar. So hopefully you'll find it really helpful. And just before we start, if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box and I'll answer them at the end. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so I'm just going to run through an agenda to start off with. So we'll start off by broadly covering the different techniques that you can use to maximize your conversion. And then we'll be going through the product description formula. So many companies use this formula for consistency across their product pages. If you're creating product pages or product descriptions at scale, it's really good to have a formula in mind. So, and then we'll be going through kind of like a checklist of what you need to include or what customers like to see on a product page. And they're all, and just sort of why they're needed for conversion and also how you can incorporate these into your own pages. Then we'll be running through some psychological biases that can be easily added to your product pages to spur on conversion. And then we'll briefly go through how to optimize product pages from an SEO perspective. So this could be a webinar itself, so we're just going to be scraping the surface on that. But we'll just run through some really simple things that you can do. And then if you're outsourcing a copywriter, you'll need to know A, how to test them, and B, what to look for when you have tested them to understand what they've written is good or not. So we'll run through ways that we can do this. And finally, we'll run through some examples of what the things you can, or the things that we've talked about look like in practice, and some things that you can join in with as well. And I'm going to be using examples throughout the webinar. So if a brand that you've worked on appears, that only means that you're doing great things. Okay, so first of all, what do I mean by product pages? I just wanted to explain exactly what I mean by this. So because of all the jargon we've got going on in the world, it's just nice to clarify these things. Essentially, it's a page that sells a product or service. So, and also when I talk about conversion here, I'm talking purely about a customer making a purchase or a transaction. So sometimes a conversion could mean signing up to a newsletter or using a particular tool. This depends on your KPIs, but for this webinar, a conversion is purely a customer making a transaction, whether that's booking or buying or getting a quote. There's also loads of things that you can do visually on a product page to help conversion, but for this webinar, I'll solely be focusing on copy. Okay, so these are just some like typical product page like examples of what you might see just for your own reference. Okay, so the product page checklist. These are essentially the core elements that customers expect to see on a product page. If any of these elements are missing, it may affect your conversion. So in this webinar, we're just going to be focusing on the title, availability, product copy, CTA, and reviews. If you are a copywriter, these are the only things that you'll need to focus on to maximize your conversion. I know that this looks or sounds like a lot, but honestly, the customer won't really be reading everything on the page. People only read about 28% of what they see on the screen. They'll be scanning for the information they need to make an informed decision, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't make every effort not only to include these elements, but include them to the best of your brand's abilities. So the product description formula, there is a best practice for product descriptions, contrary to popular belief. So you don't have to stick to it, but I have found that a 3-sentence structure works best when writing product descriptions. It's tried and tested, it allows you to add your own unique voice, and it lays out all the information that's needed in as little words as possible, which is great considering your customers don't really want loads of fluff and filler, they just want to know the core information. This combined with bullet points relaying the technical elements of the product makes for the best product description combination possible. So we're just going to run through what a 3-sentence structure looks like. So that will usually be an introduction line. So that one is talking generally about the product. Then the second line will talk about the benefits of the product. And then the third sentence will talk about what the product can go with or how it can fit into the customer's life. So the product's usage essentially. So I would recommend keeping this 3-sentence structure at a maximum of 50 words. That might seem like not enough, but believe me, it's the optimum level of words that you can get in a product description that's really going to work for your customer's attention span and just like what you need to be writing about a product. So the only exception to this is if the product has a meaningful story behind it. So this is usually for more high-end luxury products or travel products usually. So if like you're paying a lot of money for something, you want to know a bit more of a backstory behind it. So that's the only exception to the rule. And then bullet points. So the bullet points highlight the technical features and key USPs of the product. So here are some of the things that most brands include in their bullet points. You could keep these in a specific order if you want to remain consistent. And all of these obviously change depending on the product. Also, I forgot to mention, if you're not getting any of this down, don't worry, I'm going to be sending a link around at the end of the webinar. So if I'm rushing through this, don't worry, you're going to have it all for yourself for you to view afterwards. Cool, so here's just some examples of brands that use a 3-sentence structure and bullet points. So it's nice, sometimes they just have one, sometimes they just have another, and there's one there that uses both of them. And I just think it looks really nice and succinct, and it talks about the product really concisely, and it just does the job really well. So a little simple trick that I like to use is starting with a verb. So if you start with a verb, it invokes an action in the reader. Let me just talk you through what that means. So on the left, we have product descriptions starting with a verb, and on the right, we have starting without a verb. And for me, the ones on the left kind of jolt the reader into doing something, you know, get lost, subtly tap, as opposed to these tobacco pants or Roxanda has taken. It's more of like a kind of just a bit more of an introductory way of introducing the product, and it just sounds a lot nicer for me. Okay, so when you're writing about products, it helps to ask these questions about the product's USPs. So when you're like, if this is basically because you want to highlight different parts of a product that really stand out. So a couple of things you could ask is, what is special about the product? What sets it apart from the rest? And when you're asking these questions, it's really good to do some competitor research. So who out there is selling products exactly like yours, or if not exactly, very similar? You should be doing competitor analysis anyway, just as part of your day-to-day. But it's really helpful when you're writing, just to keep these in mind. If you're outsourcing a copywriter as well, just give them some competitor links, because your competitors are out there, they're probably going to be checking them themselves. So just by checking them yourself and looking at what they're writing about very similar products, can then really help you to then build on that and kind of write about what makes yours really stand out in comparison. Features tell, benefits sell. So remember this when you're writing. So how does a product's feature benefit the customer, essentially? So when consumers shopping, they're judging a product based on its benefits over anything else, over the price, over the quality, over the feel. They're basically asking, okay, what is this product going to do for me and my life? This means the benefit of the product should be at the forefront of your copy. So only mentioning the benefits won't sell the product. You actually need to have these in conjunction with the features. So because benefits are usually a bit more descriptive, it's quite nice to have those in the longer creative copy, and then you can have the features within the bullet points. And as well, one good thing to do here is try and mention things about the product that the customer can't see purely from looking at the image, because that just really creates a nice picture in their mind as well. So yeah, combining this with telling the customers how the product can be used creates an image in the user's mind. And here is just some examples of brands that have done that. So the one at the top actually talks about long-term benefits. And the one to the sort of right in the corner where it says make a splash, that's talking about how the phone, I think it is, it's waterproof. It only says it like very briefly, but from that copy you can tell that that is a feature of the phone. And then there's a nice little comparison underneath that. So instead of saying storage for 1 gigabyte of MP3s, that means that it gets 1,000 songs in your pocket. People don't necessarily understand jargon. They want to know, they want that sort of talk unpicked, and they want to know exactly what you mean and how that's going to benefit them. Okay, so it's always good to keep the customer at the forefront of your mind as well when you're writing. These are just some questions that you could ask to aid you in writing. And in answering these, you begin to shape some of the benefits that the product would have. For instance, let's say you're writing about some trainers. Why would someone use those trainers? Is it to get fit? Is it to train for an event? Like just asking these simple questions and then answering them, you can then put that directly into the copy, and it gives the reader some instances of when they might use that product. Obviously this is a really basic example, but it kind of gives you an idea. Another thing you want to do is make the product as tangible as possible. So obviously when a customer is browsing on the web, they can't touch the product. And unless we're going to get some crazy new technology that allows us to do that, we as product writers have to make the product as real as possible on the screen. So a lot of brands are testing ways to do this with imagery and video, but there are also ways that you can do this with copy. So I'm just going to talk you through a case study. When I worked at a fashion brand, I had this dilemma. So it was a luxury brand, and being a luxury brand, I wanted to tell the consumer more about the physical product, to explain how high-end the product was and how considered the design and the fabric and the cut was. And after a brainstorm, I kind of came up with a solution. So I don't know if you can see, but under the I think it's the second line, yeah. So where it says fabric, I basically added another bullet point to the bullet point section, and just explaining what the product felt like in 3 words. So I would request the product from the buyers, and then I would spend a bit of time as I was writing just feeling the product's weight and fabric. And then I implemented this across all products. So they sold fashion, they sold furnishings, they sold all sorts, like accessories, loads. And this was 3 years ago, but these screen grabs were taken just a few days ago, which means that the brand found it to be such a valuable part of the product description that they've actually kept it in all this time. So you might not be able to implement this exact style on your copy, but just think about your product and how you can make it seem as though the reader is holding it in their hand, and how can you describe the product to achieve this? Okay, so UX. There are quite a few UX tricks that you can use to aid in conversion. So product pages can be quite overwhelming for consumers. So here are just some, basically users will be drawn to three main things on a product page. They'll be drawn to headings, bold text, and buttons. So what you need to do is you need to make your headers compelling and keyword rich. You need to bolden text that is important. This can be in the long description or in the bullet points. And then you need to write CTAs that instill an action, but maybe don't stray away too far from the norm that they've seen, because this can be more confusing than not. So make your copy scannable by chunking the text in little snippets. And that means, you know, keeping the word count at 50 and adding those bullet points that we talked about. And don't have a huge block of text because it won't be read. If you have to have a huge block of text, try and separate it out into 3 different paragraphs if you have to. And then just try and use as little words as possible and place all the critical information above the fold. So obviously the fold is where you are scrolling, and I think it's like less than 1% of customers actually scroll down beyond the fold. So try and keep all of the information you need at the top. Cool, so we're going to run through some psychological biases now. There are several psychological biases that you can apply to your product pages to kickstart your users into becoming customers. They use a bit of mind manipulation that play on natural human social reactions, and each of these biases tie into each other. So that's really nice that they all tie into each other because it makes your job really easy. But there's also some really simple changes that you can make based on the back of these. So the first one is FOMO, which is fear of missing out. This is when no matter what is going on in your life, we get a feeling that we could be missing out, or the grass is always greener if we were doing something else. And I'm sure we've all felt that feeling at some point in our lives. So humans hate FOMO so much that they even fear the feeling of being left out before it's even happened. Social media has fueled the fire and heightened this fear, while also giving ample opportunity to instill FOMO in others through our own posts. And scarcity, so showing your users how little there is left of something spurs them on to purchase. It creates a sense of urgency. This is basically done through setting a hard limit on your stock, because this not only reiterates the scarcity of the product, but the clear and evidential limit causes people to buy more. And this is because people are more loss averse than gain favoring. We basically feel the pain of losing twice as much as the pleasure of gaining. And this is why scarcity works so well. So we're just going to run through some tips on how you can apply these different psychological biases to your product pages. So the first one is talk about the launch of a product before it launches. Apple does this a lot. They hype the product up so much that when it's finally launched, people don't want to miss out on buying it first. And then show how many people are looking at an item. This creates the feeling that people are currently viewing the product, are going to steal it right out from under the user, so before they've had a chance to buy it. So they want to buy it. If they see people looking at it, they want to buy it as well. And then put a time limit on a product or offering. So a countdown really creates a sense of urgency in the user, knowing that they don't have long left to purchase. Even if it's 2 days, it makes them think and act fast. And let the customer know that a product's price will go up after a certain amount of time. So everybody loves a saving, and if a saving is blatantly being taken away from them in front of their eyes, users will usually try and stop this from happening. Reduce the amount of stock, and this is the same principle. So if there's only 2 left in stock, you'll panic. And then reward them for purchasing within a time limit. So an example that I use is order within 2 hours and receive 20% off. This creates an urgency and gives them a saving as well. So you're literally rewarding them for experiencing FOMO. So, and then also give an exclusive offer to regular customers. And this is the same principle. So if you set a hard limit and make it specific, and that's really key actually, is making it specific, because copy like limited supply and booking up fast, they work, but not as well as last booked 12 minutes ago. That really makes it so specific that it almost spurs on the conversion. And here are just some examples of brands that have done that. So you can see that there's an upcoming deal. There's 5 people viewing this hotel. It works a lot with sort of travel, and you might have seen it on sort of Amazon, and a lot of clothing brands as well use these techniques. And then here are just some words that you can use in your copy for these psychological biases. I'll be sending this deck around again, so don't worry about jotting these down, but these are just really key words that help in these sorts of situations. And then social proof. So humans base their behaviour off the behaviour of others. We like to follow the actions performed by the masses. And let's face it, everyone wants to fit in. So that's why trends exist and why you're more drawn to the most popular sections of pages. And there are 3 ways that you can use social proof for your pages. So displaying the number of people who have recently bought or booked on the product page. Customer reviews are actually the most trusted because, especially if it gives your product a rating. And UGC, I always get that wrong. And this is user-generated content. So this encompasses reviews in a way because reviews are generated by users, but the standard for UGC is usually pulling in photos that have been taken on Instagram. But how does this affect copywriters? One thing you can do is actually pull in Instagram captions that people have written. So Instagram captions have kind of taken over blogs that we used to see all the time. And this is because they've almost become sort of micro blogs that people now use to post mini reviews. So long as the caption doesn't have like the hashtag ad in it, which obviously indicates that they've been paid to write that. Instagram captions are actually a really good way of like showing how people have responded to the product in a good way. And you can also monitor these. And then here are just some examples of those taking place. So we've got some UCG happening at the bottom there, just booked in Rome, so 9 properties like that. So it just shows how many properties exactly have been booked in the last 15 minutes. And then as well, the out of stock one is one that I particularly love because it doesn't say out of stock, it says everyone loves this one, which means it is so well loved by other people that it's actually sold out. And so some reviews, like there's always questions about how to monitor reviews because you don't exactly want bad reviews clogging up your product pages and putting people off. So whether whether to tweak reviews and then to put them on your product page is always a bit of a grey area in terms of morals because some brands pay writers to write reviews and that's always a bit, iffy. But I kind of look at this a bit like how journalists quote in their articles. As long as you can keep the sentiment the same, I'd say it's okay to edit your reviews to make sure that they're grammatically correct, well written, and match the tone that you want to achieve. To do this, some brands pay a person who is well versed in writing to produce an impartial review. And Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which this snippet is taken from, is one such brand. So they call this anonymous reviews, and it's obviously not anonymous, but I think it's just about the sentiment. Most of the time, they're not anonymous, but I think it just means that this person is writing with their critical hat on. They're speaking completely impartially, and that's really cool. And then Monki is also one brand, that uses a 3-sentence structure and bullet points that you can see at the side, but they also bring in UGC into their actual product images. Okay, we're just going to talk about setting expectations. So people are more likely to purchase an item if they're 100% sure of the outcome. If you're completely transparent about the purchasing process and your pricing and your returns, and your contact and your delivery, customers will trust you more because you're not only laying it out for them clearly, but you're not hiding anything or trying to trip them up. This works really well for more complicated products and services that customers aren't used to buying. So here are just some things that you can add to your product pages to set customer expectations. And here are just some examples of those. So in there, we've got a really clear step-by-step of, I think it's returns. We've got response rate, so a response time within an hour. If a customer knows that they're going to be fast responsive, that really helps them just know exactly when to expect a response. So these techniques will not only increase your customer base, but they should also keep your customers moving down the funnel. For instance, if someone got a deal in the nick of time or bought one of the last remaining products on the site, they're more than likely going to tell their friends about it because they're proud of that experience. If someone feels like they've just had more than just a sale and that they've actually had an experience that's exhilarated them, this will facilitate word of mouth. What we wouldn't recommend, however, is adding all of these different elements at the same time, because there's a risk of overwhelming the customer or distracting them from conversion with more than one offering. And also, don't neglect your brand values. So one thing we would say is try and keep everything you're doing on a product page akin to your brand values. So a product page should essentially be an extension of your brand and part of your brand story. So if doing loads of sales and shouting about discounts isn't your brand style, use one or the other of the other tips, and just choose the ones that fit in more with your brand values. And also make sure to stick to your brand voice and interweave this into your descriptions. So if you take away your brand name off the page, the readers should be able to tell what your brand is purely from looking at the product page itself. Here are just some examples of that taking place. So you can really see, I'm sure that some of you recognize some of the brands in there, and that's actually really good, because if you can recognize them, it might be from the typeface, but it might always also be from the voice being used. And if you can recognize them, that means that that brand is still bringing their voice and their tone into their product pages, which is really cool. Yeah. So some audience research. We spoke about audience on what you can do when you're writing about your products earlier on. But one thing that if you're struggling as well is if you're struggling to write about your products, it may be because you're not actually sure who you're writing to. And so one thing that I always like to ask clients if they're struggling is, have you ever met any of your customers? And this, if they say no, I just say why aren't you down there and kind of chatting to your customers about what they think about your product? Because this is the best thing that you can do for your brand, is talk to the people actually using your product, pick their brains, find out who they are. One thing that is really helpful is just have an event and make it exclusive, like making it an exclusive showing of a new launch or your new service or your latest products, and invite your customers and just talk to them, ask them why they like the brand and why they like the product, and you'll come away with so much information about them and you'll feel inspired. And then when you sit down to write your product descriptions, you'll actually know who you're writing to. Okay, so optimizing product pages for SEO. I'm just going to run through these quickly. So if you're writing product descriptions or product pages, you'll probably need to be using SEO best practice. So do some keyword research, first of all, around the categories that you're selling products in, and get some keyword variations of each product that people are searching for. And then write a specific title tag, not just women's boots. Try and be really consistent. Try and add some color in there, or make it a bit more of a specific search tag. Include the brand name or category in your title tags, and use a keyword in the header. So you can use a keyword tracker or planner. There are several free ones out there. I'm sure if you just Google, they're really easy to find. Then try and use some of the keywords that you found in your long description. And then also write unique meta descriptions. So don't exceed the character limit and include a CTA, such as find out more here or buy today at the end of the meta description. Then you can also write image alt attributes using keywords, and that really just helps customers find your product as well. And don't duplicate your content. So if you're writing loads of different product descriptions, it can be really tempting to just duplicate content across them all, but that's actually really, don't do that. So if you're not a copywriter and you need to outsource somebody to do it, you'll need to test them beforehand to make sure they're qualified for the job. First of all, you need to give your copywriter your content style guides. This will include your brand vision, your voice and tone, demographics, do's and don'ts, as well as how to write headers, what to include in the description, certain words that are banned, and basically just all your communication brand rules. Then give them product information. So this will usually be within an Excel spreadsheet, and it will include what the product is and maybe an image as well of the product, as well as measurements and fabric. Pick a few products across different categories to make sure that they're qualified to write for each one. If this Excel spreadsheet doesn't contain images, then make sure to include those in your email. Give them your website link if it's up and running, and if not, just give them some previous copy that you've written, or maybe even a competitor link so that they can see what they're doing. And then tell them exactly what you need from them, down to the last detail. Ask them to write a title, a title and bullet points and a long description, as well as meta title, meta description for each product. This should test their creative writing ability, but it should also test their SEO knowledge as well. If they're an e-commerce writer, they should have knowledge of SEO best practice, but this will just test that to make sure. And then give them an NDA to sign if you really need to. And this is especially important for a new collection or a launch that you don't want anyone to know about. And then give them a deadline. So this is usually a couple of days. And also discuss payment. So ask them how much they would charge for a test, and then how much they would also charge for the full project, if they were selected as the copywriter. Okay, and then once you've received the test, these are just some questions that you can ask about the copy. So have a read through it and ask all these questions and make sure they're all answered. One thing to think about is, does every word and sentence add something to the page? So if a word or a sentence can be removed and the meaning of the sentences around it doesn't change, then you need to assess whether this copywriter is just writing fluff and filler. And that's the one thing that you do not want on a product page, because it's not going to be the sole purpose of it. So just a little tip that I like to do here is I like to deliberately leave something off the style guide or the product information. This could be the word count or the measurement or the fabric. And this just really tests if your copywriter is on the ball, because if they are, they will usually email you and ask for the word count or say the measurement's off or the fabric's not there. Or they'll just use their best judgment, and then they'll justify this to you when they send the test over. So we're just going to run through, I promised you some good and bad copy examples, but I don't want to single out any brands who may be listening. So here's one thing that I follow that's really great for insight or just to add to yourself. So Vikki Ross is a copy chief who I've followed for many years, and I'm sure some of you know who she is. She's written for so many big brands, and she organises a Copywriters Unite evening all across the country, and she also started Copy Safari on Twitter. So this is something that anyone can join in with, and it's where people take pictures of copy that they've seen and tell the audience why it does or doesn't work for them. And it's really interesting to see the commentary and subjective opinion of those submitting these tweets, and also the comments that come off the back of them from different copywriters weighing in on why they think it's good or bad. So you can also join in with this. So have a walk around a shopping centre or a high street and see what you can find, and then add it to Twitter using the Copy Safari hashtag, and also tagged Vikki as well. So here are just some examples of those tweets. And there's some good and bad ones in there. And you can see that Vikki's even, she always obviously contributes to this. So yeah, it's just really interesting to see, even if you're just in the kitchen, pick up a milk carton and see what's on the back, see if there's anything interesting, and you'd be surprised what you find. So just the key takeaways that we're gonna go through from today. Keep your product pages consistent. Remember the 3-sentence structure when you're writing long descriptions. Features tell, benefits sell, and always think about your audience. Try and make the product as tangible as possible and use psychological biases, but only if they work with your brand values. So always keep your brand values at the forefront of your mind. Optimize for SEO where you can and test your copywriter if you're outsourcing. And have fun. So writing product descriptions shouldn't be laborious. Just imagine you're selling to someone in front of you. What would they like to hear? Cool, so I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. If you have any questions, we're just going to run through them now. Okay, so we've had a question about writing at scale. So I get asked this all the time. So how do I write, if I'm writing 400 product descriptions, how do I go about this? And there are many brands kind of playing around with algorithms at the moment, which kind of pull in information from buying sheets and relate these to certain phrases, and then they produce unique copy using this formula. I've seen some of this copy and it's really not good. It's quite technical, but it doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't have the user experience at the forefront of the brand's mind because it's automatically been generated. So you could, if you have to write 400 product descriptions, you could just stick to bullet points. However, if your product is technical, so if it's a piece of sportswear, this won't work because you need to create as much of a shopping experience on your product page as possible. And if the user isn't getting all the information they need, then they're just going to go elsewhere. So the 3-sentence structure I would recommend always. It's used for consistency, but it also does help when you're writing at scale to set the rules of your writing, and it also makes all of your copy unique and short. And once you get familiar with the product, it can be done faster and faster. So my answer to that would be there's no great answer for writing at scale. If you have committed to writing really great product pages, which you should do, in my opinion, then there's a quick fix for making sure, there's not a quick fix, sorry, for making sure that the time and effort is put into making those the best that they can be. So yeah, I think if you're writing at scale, you just need to try and put in the effort. And that's it, I think. So if you have any more questions, please let me know. I think my email was at the end of the presentation, which you'll be getting a link to. And we also hold these webinars every month across SEO and content and analytics. So yeah, watch out for those. And I hope that you've enjoyed this webinar. Bye.